Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett, and thank you for joining me for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Today's episode is called UFOs in Your Hometown, Episode 18. That's right, it's time for another hometown episode. I love doing the research for these episodes. I always learn something amazing. I get to explore all these locations all over the planet. And for those of you who don't know, this series of episodes is sort of a UFO investigative series, which was born from a challenge. Name any town, any city, any location on this planet, and I bet you I can find a UFO encounter there. And we're approaching some 200 locations that I've researched. I've got a list of 1,000 plus locations provided by all you guys out there. So thank you for that. Today I'm going to be exploring 5 new locations. And like all the previous ones, I've found amazing UFO encounters. And not just sightings, but close encounters of the first, second, third, and fourth kind. So we see sightings, we see landings, we see cases where UFOs are affecting the environment and the witness. We see cases involving humanoids, some harrowing missing time cases, and of course some onboard cases as well, where people are taken into a craft and have a face-to-face encounter with ETs. There are a lot of multiple witness cases, all kinds of evidence. So we see landing traces, we see animal reactions, we see physiological effects, we see electromagnetic disturbances, and also some interesting photographic cases. So these kinds of evidence are really important. I think that they add a level of credibility to this subject. But really the whole purpose of this series is to prove that UFOs are ubiquitous. In other words, they're seen everywhere on this planet, and UFO encounters are far more common than people realize. That's absolutely proven, I think, by the fact that I keep finding new encounters in all of these different locations. So the locations I'm presenting today include Newnan, Georgia, Sandpoint, Idaho, Winamac, Indiana, Limerick, Ireland, and Lusby, Maryland. So let's just get started with the first location I will be exploring today, which is Newnan, Georgia. This was suggested by Skip Gettleman, so thank you, Skip. Like I said, I always learn something when I explore each of these locations, and definitely Newnan, Georgia has some really amazing cases. Newnan, Georgia has a very interesting history. It was established in 1828 and was named after a general from North Carolina by the name of Daniel Newnan. He later became Georgia's Secretary of State. Now, the town of Newnan was largely untouched during the Civil War due to the fact that it had many hospitals that were used by both Union and Confederate troops. The town was easily accessible by railroad, so that turned out to be fortunate for this town. It's now perhaps most famous for its 19th century architecture. Its population is now about 42,000, so it's by no means a small town. And as probably you could expect, it has quite a few interesting UFO encounters. Now, the earliest significant encounter that I could find in Newnan occurred one evening on July 7, 1967. The main witness was about 13 years old at the time. It was around 11 p.m. that he and his friend decided to ride their bikes to the local gas station so that they could fill one of their bike tires, which had a slow leak. And they had gone about a half mile when they saw a strange red light hovering in the sky. They could clearly see this was not normal, so they stopped to watch it, and as they watched it, it started to move silently to the north. So they kept riding, and the object seemed to stop again. They stopped, and this object started moving again. As the witness says, "We went through this routine several times. It appeared it was watching us, as we were it. Finally, it moved at a faster pace to the north and disappeared." So they made it to the gas station, they filled their bike tire, and began their ride home. Now, strangely, they noticed there was no traffic on the road. This was unusual. Certainly not unusual for UFO encounters, as you may know. And they were not too far from home when the witness's friend suddenly shouted out, "Look!" And as the main witness says, "I stopped fast and looked back. There was a big orange-yellow ball sitting there, almost as low as we were, hovering. No sound, just like a really big full moon rising, but close and just hovering still. It seemed no more than 50 feet away." So both boys, as you can expect, were astonished, and they discussed the object excitedly amongst each other. Both were convinced it was the same object that they had seen earlier, and after just a few minutes, the object darted silently and quickly away. They rushed home and told the boys' parents. The witness's friend was so frightened to bike home alone that they had to convince the witness's mom to drive him home. Now, after this incident, the witness said he did have dreams of people holding him down. He started to see more UFOs. Now, 40 years after this encounter, the witness finally reported it to MUFON, and as he wrote in his report, "I hardly ever see the guy I was with, but when we do see each other, his first comment is, 'Do you remember that night?' Of course I do. We were afraid to tell anyone other than my parents. I'm telling this story now because I want to know what, if anything, happened that night. I feel like I'm missing something. I would never make something like this up. Thanks for letting me tell this story, and please advise me what to do." My heart goes out to these witnesses. It's a very life-changing experience. Here's another case from Newnan. In October 1967, a huge wave of UFO activity swept across much of eastern Georgia, showing themselves in almost a dozen towns and cities, including Warm Springs, Greenville, Perry, Dublin, Macon, Americus, Milledgeville, Fayetteville, Talbotton, Whitesburg, and more, including, of course, Newnan. Among the witnesses in Newnan was a highway patrolman, Jerry Golden, who saw what he described as an ice blue sphere high in the sky. And on the same day, he also saw a yellow rectangular-shaped object with a red side, which he says was hovering about 300 feet above the trees. There was another witness, Patrolman Dale Spradlin, along with his partner, Patrolman Gerald Maskin, who actually chased a small glowing sphere about 8 inches wide for almost 10 miles just outside of Newnan. This was also a blue sphere, and as Officer Spradlin says, and I quote, "It was a good distance in front of us, pulling away. So we turned around to come back to town. The object turned on us and followed. It was gaining on us and was going about 75 miles per hour. It was a bright light and looked a lot like one of those mercury vapor lamps with sort of a bluish glow. It moved around all right, but I don't know what it was. After the object caught up, it pulled into the sky, emitting a beam of bluish light that illuminated the roadway." Now, it turned out there were 2 outside witnesses, a boy and girl at a lake, who said that the object appeared to be right above the patrol car. They saw it chasing the patrol car. Now, officials at Warner Robins Air Force Base were contacted. They were given the information about these reports, but denied seeing anything on their radar. There was another witness, Mac Long. He had his sighting in Whitesburg, Georgia. This is just 10 miles northwest of Newnan. I decided to include it because it's clearly connected. And as Mac Long says, and again I quote, "I was just standing there, and I heard something that sounded like a swarm of bees. When I looked up, I saw the thing, and it took off. It was sort of a brown color with red spots and about the size of a tire rim. There couldn't have been anyone in that thing. It was too small. When I looked up, the thing took off through the woods, turned sideways between the trees, and it sure was traveling fast." So he watched it go down between some hills, apparently for a landing. So he and some friends searched for it, but they were not able to find any evidence of it. Moving along, here's a somewhat concerning case involving 4 witnesses and missing time. This occurred at 8 p.m. one evening in June 1972, and I'll just quote the witness directly. As he says, "My girlfriend and I were in the back seat while my best friend and his girlfriend were in the front seat. My partner's girlfriend exclaimed, "What's that?" Going on about seeing something in the sky and thinking she was full of BS, I ignored her. But then her boyfriend also saw it, so the two young men exited the car and saw what they described as, quote, "a coffee can-shaped object hovering." And per the witness, and again I quote, "it had stationary lights on the bottom and lights in the middle revolving around it. The craft was clearly seen, however I couldn't tell how far away it was. After a few minutes in that position, it started to doubt about at impossible speeds of flight for us. We lost time and drove away, not caring. We were all naked. Long story short, we lost track of time, hours, and drove away naked." So I don't know about that case. This is what they reported. The next case I could find occurred one night in the summer of 1975. The reporting witness was 5 years old at the time and was with his 8-year-old brother and 5 or 6 other neighborhood kids. They were outside one of their homes located on Roscoe Road. And as the witness says, "What caught our eye was a huge, glowing, orangey-yellow circle or sphere that flew in from the west and hovered near the center of the clearing, not too far away over the tree line. We all stood and watched it hover for a moment. Then it split in half vertically, and fire shot up out of the middle. I don't remember an actual fireball being released, just an explosion of fire. Then the two halves came back together, and the sphere flew back off to the west and below the horizon. I seem to remember it went up a little before it went up and down. All the movements, appearing, disappearing, splitting, and rejoining, were calm, smooth, and controlled, like gliding. From what I remember, it didn't make any sound. I don't recall it illuminating anything. It seemed to be close, maybe a quarter to a half mile away." Amazing. On December 11 and 12 in 1985, a 7-year-old boy was awakened by his father, as the boy requested, so he could go outside and use his brand new telescope to watch the Geminid meteor shower. He was outside watching the meteor shower. He had just gotten out there when he says he saw a massive UFO, and I'll just quote him directly. As he says, "All of a sudden, from behind me, going west to east, was a huge form in the sky. It was flat on the bottom and the size of at least 3 football fields. It took up most of the viewing sky. I saw a ton of small lights that were a weird white color. My first thought was that it looked like a flying battleship or aircraft carrier. I remember feeling intrigued and not scared. It couldn't have been more than 1,000 feet in the air. It was moving slow. Then what happened next was strange. I had lost time. I was looking at the object, and the whole time could not have been more than 30 seconds before it happened. I heard my dad call my name and say it was 2 a.m. and I needed to get my butt back inside. I was looking at the sky still, and the UFO was gone. I didn't tell him, as I knew he would make fun of me. There's no doubt in my mind this happened. I have been in military intelligence and had a top secret clearance. I'm a very reliable witness. I still get emotional and teary when I think on it." This next case occurred on the afternoon of August 31st, 1988, and this one occurred right over Newnan High School. And as the witness says, "I was on the field doing marching band practice, and I noticed a silver orb about 500 to 1,000 feet above me, just hovering. It stayed there for a really long time, and I kept wondering why nobody else could see it. I never said anything, and nobody seemed to notice it, and I don't know why. I kept wondering why it just stayed there. It made no noise and had no lights. It was shiny and round with no windows. It felt like it was watching me. I wasn't scared, but that just felt like a crazy thought. As we continued practice, I kept wondering why it had not moved from its position, and a long time later, before we were done with practice, it suddenly just took off at an extremely high rate of speed and was out of sight." Here's a case reported to MUFON which occurred on October 16, 2016. And again, I'll just quote the witness directly. As he says, "There were 2 very bright lights in the sky. Now, the town of Newnan is some 30 miles from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, and the witness was very familiar with air traffic patterns from this airport, and he knew that what he was seeing was unusual. So he quickly grabbed a camera and snapped a photo. And as the witness says, they were out of the landing path from the west and east of the directions of the planes in the area. The orb lights stood out like a sore thumb. The orbs were also closer together than any planes would be on approach to the airport. So there you go, a pretty interesting photograph. And here's another case involving a photograph. This case occurred at 2 p.m. on October 3rd, 2022. The witness was at his place of employment when a coworker pointed out the object, and as they watched, it moved directly above them, going the opposite direction of the clouds. So he immediately reported it to Newfork, and as he said in his report, quote, "As I write this, it is still hovering almost directly above, slightly to the south." There you go, Skip Gettleman. I hope you found that interesting. Definitely, Newnan, Georgia has been visited. I've already explored a number of towns and cities in Georgia. I don't know how many cities there are on this planet, how many towns, but I would imagine it's in the millions. And if I keep finding these cases, these UFO encounters in all of these cities, I mean, that just goes to show truly how many times UFOs have visited this planet. I mean, it's almost endless. And as you can see, these weren't just sightings. Some really amazing, very close encounters in Newnan, Georgia. All right, let's move on to the next city. And the next location I will be exploring is Sandpoint, Idaho. This was suggested by Bradley Carnegie. I'm really glad you suggested this, Bradley. Absolutely, some astonishing cases there. Looks like a really beautiful town. I want to visit all these places now. Each time I hear about all the encounters there, it makes me want to go visit it. But yeah, let's explore Sandpoint, Idaho, and see what kind of cases we can find. Sandpoint is a relatively small town of about 10,000 people. It's beautiful. It's situated along the shore of Lake Pend Oreille. This is Idaho's largest lake. The travel guide, Rand McNally, actually named it, quote, "the most beautiful small town in America." The area was originally occupied by the Kalispel Native Americans, and it officially became a city in 1907. Although almost everybody in the city lives in a densely populated area right along the lakeside, nearby is Idaho's largest ski resort, and for a relatively small town, it has a huge number of reported UFO encounters. One early case from Sandpoint occurred in April 1963 when numerous residents, including police, reported seeing a, quote, "strange black object with no rotors or wings, glowing with an orange flame at night." It's a pretty brief report. I couldn't find any other information, but it kind of kicks off the UFO activity in Sandpoint. The next case comes from 4 Sandpoint teenagers who, one evening in the summer of 1976, decided to drive up to the local Pinecrest Cemetery in hopes of an adventure. It was about midnight, and they sat in a VW bug on a hill overlooking the cemetery, and they got an adventure all right because a UFO showed up. As one of the witnesses says, "Out of the corner of my left eye, I saw a large shield-shaped object hovering approximately 20 feet in front of my VW bug. I yelled at everyone to look. We were all literally frozen in fear. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was fairly big, shaped like a shield, and the brightest white I have ever seen. It had no lights at all. My boyfriend threw my keys at me. They landed on the floor. I couldn't move. I don't really know how much time went by. I remember clearly that the bright white light of this craft started to fade, and then it was gone. It didn't fly away, it was just gone." Now the witness believes that they may have had missing time, though this is not confirmed, and as the witness says, "I grabbed my keys and backed out of that cemetery and left. The strange thing is, the 3 people who saw this with me, we never discussed it again. This happens all the time. I see this over and over again with UFO encounters, particularly cases that involve deeper levels of contact. Now, this witness did later visit a famous Sandpoint psychic who blurted out without any prompting that the witness had seen a UFO and told her that it came not from outer space, but from the inner earth. So I don't know about that, but as the witness says, I have never forgotten that night up close with a UFO and never will. Moving on, here's a rare daylight disc sighting which occurred around noon on July 18, 1979. Two girls reported seeing a roundish silver object hovering over North Boyer Avenue, just north of the airport. They said it looked like a satellite, kind of, with an antenna on the top and bottom. The craft seemed to be oscillating, and suddenly it left at a high rate of speed at a 45-degree downward angle. It looked to them like it was landing between the airport and south of the Schweitzer Cutoff Road. At the same time of their sighting, there was in fact another report about 13 miles to the south at Coquilala. It was just a few months later, around midnight and 1 a.m. on October 5, 1979, that dozens of people, including several police officers in the Sandpoint area and beyond, all reported UFOs. One resident called the police after seeing what he described as 6 objects, which he said, quote, seemed to change colors like Roman candle fireworks. He said that they were loud and roared overhead, remaining in view for 30 seconds. Now these apparently were seen over a much wider area, including all the way up to Washington State. Some of the witnesses who saw these objects said that they were perfectly silent. Now, Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane confirmed that they received several calls and, according to some reports, actually scrambled planes after these objects, though later a spokesperson for Fairchild denied this claim and said that they would not investigate UFOs as the Air Force had closed Project Blue Book, which found that UFOs represent no threat to national security. Here's another case 1 year later, less. It was another very widely viewed incident on March 16, 1980, when people over a wide area, including Boise, Treasure Valley, and of course Sandpoint, reported UFOs. The Idaho State Police said that they actually received a flood of calls over the days before and leading up to this sighting. Sandpoint resident Dr. Paul King said that he observed the glowing object and actually chased it in his car. As he says, I saw the ball of fire. I followed it until it dipped into the trees. I thought it might have been a flare, but I couldn't find it, and now I don't know what it was. Another witness was Dr. Roger Schubert, who, with his daughter, watched, quote, a ball of fire in the sky. He said it looked to him to be about 3 to 5 miles away. These UFO reports came from as far away as Sacramento, where the Office of Emergency Services said that what they believed people were seeing was Venus, which was sitting unusually low on the horizon. So I don't know that the witnesses who actually saw this object would agree with that, but we often see debunking explanations put forth by officials. Here's another very unusual encounter. This one actually involves a musical UFO, which was seen by a mother and her 2 sons. This was reported to Newfork, the National UFO Reporting Center, more than 15 years after it occurred. It was a late afternoon or very early evening in the summer of 1983 or 1984. And as the mother says, we heard a craft overhead. It sounded like music was coming from it. There were lights, and it seemed disc-like in shape. My 2 young sons were with me, aged 10 and 8, and they observed the craft also. Now we have the testimony of both these sons. As one of the boys says, I can remember hearing music coming from outside the house. My brother and I ran outside where my mother already was to see where the music was coming from. When I got outside, I saw a huge oblong saucer flying over our house. It was playing computer-generated type music. The object was flying maybe just a couple of 100 yards above our house. I can also remember lights of every color, changing and blinking throughout the ship. The other brother writes, after drawing my attention to the sky with the sounds of loud music, a UFO hovered over my house, traveling at a slow speed. The size of the craft was around 40 feet in diameter, hovering about 200 feet above the house. It was emitting a loud, distorted noise that could have been music. It was spinning slightly and moved at about 25 to 35 miles per hour. It was saucer-shaped and had various lights around the vehicle. After staring in awe for around 10 seconds, I ran to the front porch, thinking where I could find a camera inside. But I decided that I would miss the opportunity to see the craft again, and therefore turned to watch it float off into the distance. My mother, brother, and I all stared at each other in bewilderment. Now this brother later speculated that perhaps they might have viewed the human-built Avro vehicle, but he does confirm his family's testimony that they all saw, quote, a UFO saucer playing loud music. Moving on, 1987, a woman says that she was in Sandpoint City Park when she saw and photographed what she believes was a UFO hiding behind a cloud. I don't have the photograph, unfortunately, but at a UFO meeting she shared the photograph and says, they like to hide behind cloud formations so they can observe us undetected. Here's another really interesting case. This comes from a lady who was with her family on their boat on Lake Pend Oreille one summer night in 1995, and she describes seeing a classic flying saucer. As she says, the sun had already gone down and the sky was still lit up slightly when our family, 2 daughters and my husband, were in our boat and going into shore. As I was looking to my right, I did a double take because I saw an extremely large silver disc hovering with no sound in between 2 hills. It was a very large disc shape with many portholes, silver in color. The portholes, many of them, were clearly visible. It was suspended. I said to my husband, what in the world is that? Now unfortunately the noise of the boat's engine was so loud that her husband didn't hear her, and her 2 daughters didn't even seem to notice. So the witness looked back, and as she said, quote, then the hill to the north began to block the disc, and it went out of my sight. Unfortunately, nobody else saw the craft. This next case occurred on November 24, 1998, and involves a very close-up sighting. As the witness says in their own words, my friend and I witnessed strange lights over my backyard. We watched whatever it was descend closer and closer to the pond in my backyard. The light coming from the craft was so intense we could hardly see anything else in the night sky. It was the strangest thing, because there was no sound. All of a sudden, the craft just zoomed across the sky, leaving a bright trail of light behind it. My friend and I concluded that the craft left because of an incoming airplane. Moving along, here's another case about 4 years later. This was on April 22nd, 2002. It's a pretty brief encounter. A couple by the name of Herm and Darlene Fall said that they saw a strange sphere southwest of Sandpoint. They told their kids, who jokingly called them the loonies and the boonies. But it turns out they weren't the only witnesses, because another man says that he saw this object hovering about 100 feet over his home on Coburn Culver Road, just a short distance northeast of Sandpoint, and he watched it zip off at high speed. Another sighting 2 years later occurred in the summer of 2004 and was reported to MUFON by a witness who provided a detailed description. It was one evening around 1:10 a.m. The witness, whose bedroom overlooked Lake Pend Oreille, says he was awakened by his dog barking. So he quieted the dog and then started to go back to bed when the dog began barking even more intensely. So he looked outside, and this is when he saw a brilliant peacock blue sphere hovering about 300 feet above the lake. And as the witness says, it had a white ring around the sphere and a beam of light descending to the water. The beam hit the water approximately 1/4 of a mile out from my home. It was moving slowly towards me. I thought it was a helicopter, perhaps searching for someone, but there was no sound at all. The object passed in front of the full moon and was clearly a solid object, sphere-shaped, with no visible wings or tail assembly. It was pretty exciting. I watched it intently. The light got closer and closer. I began to feel some alarm. What the heck was this? Then, just as the object passed over the shoreline and the beam of light touched my lawn, it winked out. The object was just gone. There was no sign of anything up there at all. The witness does say that in 1972, he and others had another sighting in Sandpoint, but he does not provide any details of that sighting. One final case in Sandpoint occurred at precisely 6:30 p.m. on September 30, 2020. As the witness says, it was about dusk, a beautiful orange sunset. I was looking out our picture window enjoying the sunset when I saw a, quote, star. It struck me as unusual as it was quite dim, and I was surprised that I could see it that well when the sky was not yet dark. The, quote, star was white and stationary and seemed to be a normal star at first. As it got darker, I glanced at it off and on several times over a 2-hour period, and it did not move at all, as other heavenly bodies did. Then the object seemed to grow and began to get brighter, much brighter. Then it suddenly took off in a north to northwest direction. It was moving very fast, faster than any plane I am aware of. Then it disappeared. The witness says he heard no noise coming from the object, but he does admit that it was quite distant. After interviewing the witness, MUFON field investigator and Idaho State Director James Millard closed this case as a, quote, unknown aerial vehicle. Thank you, Bradley Carnegie. Sandpoint, Idaho definitely delivered. Some very interesting cases there. I think the most intriguing for me was the case involving a musical UFO. I've only run across that very few times, but definitely I have heard of other cases. So that's super interesting to me. But as I've said before, each case adds to our knowledge of what's going on here, the extraterrestrial presence on our planet. So I think each case is very important because it's another piece of the puzzle. All right, let's move to our next location, which is Winamac, Indiana. This one was suggested by Cole Leiter. Thank you, Cole Leiter. This turned out to be a really fun place to explore. I certainly learned a lot, and of course there's some very interesting UFO encounters that are in Winamac, Indiana. This very small town has just less than 3,000 residents, and it's located on less than 2 square miles, so it's a small town. Its name comes from Chief Winamac of the Potawatomi tribe. Winamac actually means catfish. Winamac became a town in 1868. For many years, it had a famous artisan well known for its healing properties, until one day that well ran dry. I was only able to find a few encounters here, but certainly enough to say that yes, Winamac has been visited. The first case was published in the newspaper, the Winamac, Indiana Democrat, and it described witnesses who saw a, quote, reddish thing orbiting over a farm on August 3, 1952. As the article reads, and I quote, an honest-to-goodness flying saucer, if there is such a thing, was seen by Winamac residents Sunday night at about 9:30. Leo Stevens, living just south of Winamac, glimpsed a reddish object flying above his farm. He called his daughter, Miss Clark Porter, and members of that household went to investigate. They could see the object from the Porter's yard and then drove to the Stevens home. Diane Porter and Barbara Heather told the Democrat that the thing seemed to be spinning in circles and making a big circle over the farm. Of a reddish hue, it was brighter at one end. They watched it for about 15 minutes when it dipped into and behind clouds, and it then flew off towards Monticello. Mary Kay Falvey was also in the group. Now here's an interesting case that qualifies as a close encounter of the second kind due to strange physiological effects reported by the witnesses. This one occurred on the evening of October 9, 2011. And as the witness writes, "My brother and I were returning home from visiting a mutual friend. We were in my car driving down back roads when my brother pointed out a light he'd never seen before. I told him it was a cell phone tower before I realized that there were no cell phone towers in that area. We'd driven down that road our entire lives and had never seen a light in the area. I slowed down a little bit so we could get a better look at it. There was a row of 3 lights hovering above the cornfield. The sky was blacked out around the lights in an area roughly equal to the size of the field and 20 to 30 feet above the tree line, though prior to this the sky had been clear. The lights were fuzzy around the edges, but did not flicker or waver. We didn't know what to make of it. We discussed it for a minute or two, not really scared, but just wondering what it was, before the lights quickly rose straight up into the sky, much faster than anything I've ever seen flying before, and promptly disappeared. It was completely silent. We just sat there in shock before I resumed driving us back home. I actually don't remember stopping, but the car was in park. We did not experience missing time or anything of that nature, but our heads were both what we can only describe as fuzzy for the next day. I assume because of the shock of what we had seen." A final report from Winamac comes from a military and law enforcement officer. It occurred on the afternoon of September 7, 2022, at the intersection of US Highway 35 and West 350 North. This is about 2 miles immediately north of Winamac. And as the officer says in his own words, "It was a chrome metal orb the size of a basketball. The object was observed moving in a circle of a 10-foot radius on the ground. It was highly polished, with no obvious aerodynamic appendages or propulsion structure. The object went airborne as my vehicle approached within approximately 1,000 feet. I visually tracked the object take a 30-degree flight path towards the southwest at a high rate of speed for approximately 2,000 feet before abruptly stopping in midair. The object remained suspended for approximately 10 seconds before ascending straight up at an extreme rate until out of sight. I pulled over and returned to the area initially viewed on the ground, and I observed that a circular trench had been impressed into the grass where the object was seen rolling in a circle before going airborne. The object was not visible upon exiting my vehicle. An ozone odor was noted near the turf marks." Thank you again, Collider. Pretty small town, Winamac, but definitely I found a few cases, not a lot. But it just goes to show once again, name any town, any city, any location, I bet you I can find an encounter there. I was a little bit nervous about Winamac because that's a pretty small town. But such interesting cases, particularly that one involving the military and law enforcement officer who saw this unidentified object on the ground, making ground traces and then taking off. As a trained observer, I think his testimony is perhaps has an extra level of credibility from a person who is not a trained observer. But still, all these cases are so incredible to me. Now we're moving to the next location. I really want to thank you, Ned, for suggesting this location. It was a difficult one for me to explore because it's outside of the United States, but I found plenty of cases in Limerick, Ireland. What a fun place to explore. I've always wanted to go to Ireland. I have Irish roots, so one of these days I'm going to get there. But how amazing it was to research Ireland and the town of Limerick, because I found some amazing cases, including one really astonishing onboard encounter, but quite a few humanoid cases, which I'm not sure are ETs, but might be what we call the little people, or fairies. But let's just get right to it and explore Limerick, Ireland. Located along the River Shannon, Limerick is Ireland's 3rd largest city, with a population of over 100,000 residents. It has a very long, very rich history reaching back well before the Middle Ages, actually to Viking times. It was founded in 1922 AD by Vikings, Scandinavian settlers, and is actually one of the oldest cities in Ireland. Its history is amazing. Limerick rhymes are believed to have originated here from a drinking chorus, but we could spend hours on just all the amazing events that have occurred in Limerick's amazing history. But let's just stick to Limerick's UFO history. A very early Limerick case comes from amateur astronomer James Ferguson, who said that on December 24, 1909, he saw a brightly lit object rise over the northeast horizon. It maneuvered southward for about 20 minutes, and then it retraced its course, vanishing below the horizon. So clearly not a normal astronomical body. Now Ireland is of course famous for sightings of the fairy folk. Here's an early account from 1930 which was written by John Barry. Schoolboy John Kelly was walking on a road in Limerick when he encountered a 2-foot-tall man dressed in red. John asked the man where he was from, and the little man snapped at him, saying, quote, "I'm from the mountains, and it's all equal to you what my business is." So John told his friends about this encounter, and the next day they returned with him to the location where he saw this little man. Now John's friends hid in the bushes, while John reportedly came upon a whole group of these little folk. One of the fairy folk took John's hand, and they started to walk a short distance. And this is when the fairies saw John's friends hiding in the bushes, and they all ran away. This sounds crazy, but as it turns out, this area was a fairy hotspot with a lot of other witnesses. According to the Irish Press newspaper, other men had seen the fairies who were described as having, quote, "hard, hairy faces like men and no ears." Some of the witnesses actually chased these little people, but could not catch them as they, quote, "jumped the ditches as fast as a greyhound. Though they passed through the hedges, ditches, and marshes, they appeared neat and clean all the time." So that's interesting. I don't know that we would call these ETs, but they're certainly humanoids. Now here's another weird Limerick humanoid case, which comes from researcher Harry Challenger, who published the case in the Flying Saucer Review, issue number 50, volume 1. It occurred one winter night in 1976. Two people were traveling by car between Ennis and Limerick. The road was unlit, and they were traveling at about 50 miles per hour when the passenger saw what he described as an 8-foot-tall luminous figure balancing on the edge of the curb. It was standing upright. The passenger could see that it had a large furry head, a long, thin, spidery body covered with hair, and it appeared to be a green-gray in color. It was wearing shabby-looking, loose-fitting gray clothes, which seemed to be embedded with lines of light. It had long arms with hands that reached below the knees, ending with claws. So very strange. And in fact, the passenger was so frightened by this sight that he couldn't even speak to the driver at first, and he just ducked down in the car to hide. He did tell the driver what he saw. The next day, he was in such a state of shock that he actually missed work. He had no intention of going public, but his friend who was with him did talk about it, much to his embarrassment, and that's how we learned of this case. Here's another case. This comes from an article titled "More Fairies and the UFO Connection," written by Joy Barish of Sharon, Massachusetts. She says that in May of 1984, she and her husband were driving on a highway near Limerick when she saw something so strange she could hardly believe her own eyes. And again, I'll just quote her directly. As Joy says, "I saw a tall female figure, all red, dressed in a tutu. My husband, driving a small rental car, saw nothing. He says he saw a man crossing the street, but I didn't see this at all. The figure I saw raised its arms, twirled and danced a bit, and instantaneously dematerialized in the middle of the highway. I got amnesia immediately and could only for a bit recall it standing by the hedgerow." Of course, she later did recall this whole incident, There's that weird amnesia effect we see so often with UFO and ET encounters. Now, of course, Limerick does have standard UFO sightings, if you can call a UFO sighting standard. On April 17, 1991, Pat Delaney and Ann Griffin reportedly saw a greenish UFO. Now, the editor where this story was published apologizes for reporting the Limerick encounter in the style of a limerick, and he writes, "There once was a funny green light that shone for 2 ticks in the night. It made the air glow, and nobody knows if the answer they've got for it's right." So, there you go. Another 1991 sighting comes from Mary Hartnett, who was driving with her husband from Limerick to Tralee. They were on a dark road when they saw a huge circular object alongside the road ahead of them. Mary says the object had a row of windows around it and that it was hovering about 20 feet above the ground. As they approached it, this object jumped from one side of the road to the other and then began to pace their vehicle for some distance, only flying away when they approached a more inhabited area. They felt that this craft was absolutely intelligently controlled, and that the UFO occupants were, quote, playing with them as they traveled down the road. Now here's a very controversial Limerick case which generated considerable publicity when on August 11, 1996, reportedly a man by the name of John Whaley saw and filmed 2 or 3 glowing orbs darting around and above a field, creating a crop circle. So this was all caught on film. This footage took the crop circle world by storm and again was widely publicized and came to be known as the Oliver's Castle 1996 crop circle. Now 1 year later, John Whaley went public and said that he actually faked this footage. He said that he saw this crop circle already there and that he added the balls of light into the footage. Unfortunately, this confession is riddled with inconsistencies and problems. In fact, in an article titled Oliver's Castle 1996 by Bert Jansen, he explains why this confession could not possibly be true. One is that the witness describes seeing the crop circle first and then adding the balls of light. But the footage shows the crop circle being made by the balls of light. And second, the location where the witness says he saw and filmed this crop circle does not even have a view of the field. And this is only a few of the other inconsistencies that the article points out. So you can make up your own mind about this footage. It's very hard to say whether or not this is real, but certainly it seems difficult to fake something like that back in 1996 with a standard video camera. Moving along, this next case occurred in 2001. The date is approximate. This comes from a truck driver who agreed to tell his story only on the condition of absolute anonymity. It's a pretty harrowing encounter. As he says in his own words, "Myself and my helper were supplying bakeries at the time. We set out from Limerick early and we were driving along and saw this very bright star. We traveled a couple of miles and got to Newnan. When we were in the town, we didn't see it, but when we got back on the road, it was there again. It was as if it kept on my shoulder and followed us along. Then it would shoot off. We were a mile outside of Roskria when it suddenly appeared to be on a collision course with us. It hovered in front of the truck and forced me to stop. It was blocking the road. We couldn't drive on or turn around because the road was too narrow. It was frightening. It was for a good 30 seconds, and then it took off again at a nice and easy pace. It went through the sky into its own position and hovered about 400 yards away. When I finished work, I picked up the evening press, and on the front page was the story of a show band from Donegal who were driving home and had encountered the same thing. They said it was the worst experience of their lives. Now here's an absolutely amazing case involving a full-blown onboard UFO encounter. It comes from a gentleman by the name of Jerry Battles, He's a 61-year-old retired carpenter who lives in County Limerick in the village of Pallaskenry, about 12 miles outside of Limerick proper. It was on December 26, 2001. He and a friend had met at the Seven Sisters pub and had 2 drinks. At the end of this visit, around 8 p.m., Jerry left the pub and began the almost 4-mile walk back to his home. He was only a few minutes away from his house when, without warning, he saw a bright, otherworldly-looking white light sitting at the end of the laneway. He felt as if he was being drawn towards it. And as he says, the next thing he knew, he found himself inside what appeared to be a spacecraft. And he was not alone. He saw about 40 other people, all in a trance, motionless like statues. As Jerry says in his own words, they were all male, all different age groups, all standing shoulder to shoulder like mannequins. I remember one man next to me wearing a Columbo-style coat and hat. We were all in a state of paralysis. I could only move my eyes, so I couldn't see much. The next thing I remember is floating into another bigger chamber with a 360-degree viewing deck. It was then I saw the extraterrestrial. I couldn't tell how big he was, or even if he had arms or legs. All I remember is his big cone head and his beautiful, ginormous eyes. They were jet black, almost like mirrors. He spoke to me through telepathy and said, quote, "You are not terrified like the others." Jerry replied, "No, I am not. Should I be?" The ET asked him, "What would you like to see?" Without thinking about it, Jerry replied, "The North Pole." And as Jerry says, the next thing, the extraterrestrial gave a command, and in an instant we were at the North Pole. I was in awe. I remember thinking of that line from Star Trek, "Warp speed, Mr. Sulu." It was like driving through a snowstorm at 500 miles an hour. The ET then gave Jerry a message, warning that Earth was on a pathway towards self-destruction and that humankind would suffer the same fate as the dinosaurs. The ET told Jerry, "You have come a long way in such a short space of time, but your time is running out." The ET warned that Earth was going to be obliterated by a giant asteroid. The ET said, quote, "We are 4 million light years more advanced than you are. We have been observing you for millennia. In all that time, you have only excelled at 2 things, global warfare and lying to your own species." Per Jerry, the ET told him, "You must use the Force, be one with the Force, harness the Force." And as Jerry says, he told me that every one of our governments have been lying to us from day one and not to trust them. He also warned not to trust the banks, as they have been lying as well and have a hidden agenda. He also forewarned the impending global financial crisis and told me that if we do not change our ways, we are going to end up like the dinosaurs. Like many contactees, Jerry Battles at first had no memory of this encounter. It was completely shrouded in amnesia. But a few weeks after the incident, a contractor at the regional hospital found a man's coat on the hospital roof. It turned out to be Jerry's coat. There was no viable explanation how it got there, but this event triggered Jerry's memory. As he says, "I have no idea how it got there. It was only after having the coat returned to me that the events of December 26, 2001 started to come back to me." Jerry does understand how fantastical his story sounds, and he admits that those he has told have thought him to be mad, but he insists that he is not mentally ill. He says that those who discount accounts of alien abductions are, quote, "naive and have small imaginations." He insists that this encounter really happened, and as he says, the truth is definitely out there. He has since become an artist and has drawn many representations of the ETs that he saw. Here is an amazing multiple witness series of UFO sightings in Limerick, which began on September 10th, 2009. A woman was in her home when her mother called her and her sister out to the backyard where she was walking their dog. In the sky, they saw strange lights. As the witness says, they were circular and moved fast at different angles and made no noise. As it turns out, some months earlier on May 25, this witness had seen strange lights outside. But as she says, I told my family, but nobody believed me. Now, after this new sighting, she says, they finally believed me about what I saw. But events weren't over yet. As the witness says, the next day, my other sister, who was asleep the night before when we saw the lights, let the dog out at 21:23, that's 9:23 p.m., and called us out to see some lights in the sky. This time there were 4 crafts, but they were flashing and changing colors, and they kept fading away and flashing back again. This time, myself, my mother, my 2 sisters, my brother, and both my friends were there, and we all saw them. They were moving very quickly, and again, didn't make any sound. When we tried to get them on video, it wouldn't turn up on the screen. 2 of the lights seemed to be following each other. The witness closes her account by saying, we are going out every night from now on with more people, so they'll see the UFOs too. Thank you very much, Ned. What a joy to explore Limerick, Ireland, a very beautiful place. I definitely want to visit there one day. And as we can see, lots of UFO encounters there, and apparently some fairy encounters with the little people. I was really intrigued by the case of Jerry Battles, who claims to have been taken on board not far from his home. There's a lot of details to that case that absolutely ring true to me. So such an amazing case. I think the detail where he saw all the people standing there kind of in a trance really rang true to me because I had that same exact experience when I had an onboard encounter. I'm going to have to do a video about my own experiences one of these days. All right, let's move to the next and final location. I could only explore 5 because I found so many cases. This next location is Lusby, Maryland. And this was suggested by 2 people, including Jeff and Old Mountain Marine and Metals. I know Old Mountain Marine and Metals, you waited a very long time for me to explore this location, but I finally got to it as I promised I would. Thank you, both of you guys, for suggesting Lusby, Maryland. It's a tiny little town, definitely, but still I found some amazing cases, as I think you'll agree. The town of Lusby got its name from the prominent Lusby family, which had lived there since the late 1600s. Lusby officially became a town in 1701. It is really famous for the Calvert Cliffs State Park, which has fossils from the Miocene age, including teeth from the giant megalodon. It is also home to the Calvert Cliffs nuclear power plant and is adjacent to the Patuxent River Naval Air Station. It has a population under 3,000 and sits on less than 4 square miles. But facilities like this nuclear power plant and the Naval Air Station are known to attract UFOs. So perhaps that is a factor here as to why this small town has some really interesting UFO encounters. And this first one is amazing, involving an incredible humanoid encounter. This occurred in the summer of 1993. The witness was a Navy man who was on leave and visiting his parents' home in Lusby. And as he says, I don't recall what time it was, but at some point in the night, I was roused to consciousness by what appeared to be a very bright flashlight-type lights being shined in my bedroom window. They were bright enough to light my entire room. Needless to say, I got up and went to the front door to see who it was shining these bright lights at my bedroom window. When I opened the door, I couldn't believe what I saw. A craft, maybe 40 feet in diameter, that looked like a yo-yo, only flatter. By that, I mean it looked like 2 saucer-shaped craft that were joined in the middle about 2/3 of the way in. The outermost edges of each half of the craft had a row of lights around them as well. I can't remember whether the lights were multicolored or white. The craft hung just above the tree line over the dirt road in front of the house, and it was giving off the purest of white-blue light from the bottom of the craft that fanned out beneath it. There was also a sort of sparkle or electricity to the light. Now, the witness continues, this is where it gets different for me. Inside of this brilliant light was standing a tall, skinny being with very long, bony legs and arms that had long, bony fingers that seemed a bit out of proportion to the rest of its body. I can't remember if the being was clothed or not. I can tell you it had a humanoid head with eyes that were very human, very thin lips, a thin, almost non-existent nose. What also struck me odd about this being is that it had what looked like very long hair, only it was real thick, almost like dreadlocks, but not nearly as messy. So I am standing in my front door looking at this craft light and the being standing on the dirt road looking at me. And I am thinking to myself that I should run. But where to? I don't know where to go. I am paralyzed with fear. I want to run so badly. But then I hear a voice, not out loud but in my head, say to me, "Don't be afraid. You have no reason to be afraid." And all at once I was calm. I told myself I have nothing to be afraid of. And that was it. The next thing the witness knew, he was waking up in bed the next morning. He not only remembered the events of the night before, but he instantly had a flashback of having seen this same craft before, along with a second craft when he was just a young child in his parents' home in Fort Washington, Maryland. He also experienced missing time as a child. Also very strange, as a Navy man, the witness always, without exception, he says, wakes up at 6 a.m. However, following this recent humanoid encounter, he woke up very late, at 10:30 a.m. Says the witness, I felt drugged, very disoriented, and a bit unstable, and my nose hurt and was a bit bloody. It felt like I had my whole finger shoved up my nose. Now, years later, in 2003, the witness took a full-body MRI that was offered to him for early detection of medical problems, so he took advantage of this, and this MRI showed something very unusual. As the witness says, I was shocked to be told that I have a small mass on one of my lungs. I was told by one doctor that they were a bit confused as this mass was not calcified, so it should be growing in size at least slowly. But since it isn't doing anything, they were not going to biopsy it so as not to provoke it. Anyway, he says, the most recent scan was within the past 12 months and there still has been no change in whatever is in my lung. Now the witness insists his encounter was not a dream and he thinks that he may have actually been abducted. As he says, I would like to get to the bottom of this once and for all, to understand that what happened to me that night did in fact happen. Here's another case. On July 18, 2011, an aviation mechanic and his niece were watching the night sky looking at the stars and the occasional satellite when they saw something much closer and much stranger. As the witness says, a sphere appears in the sky traveling south to north, just maybe 50 feet above the trees. These are large oak trees, approximately 80 feet high. The object appeared to be 30 to 35 feet in diameter, traveling very fast, and it just vanished after approximately 2 seconds. I was in shock, and I saw my niece was the same. It was a large sphere. The inside area was a brilliant blue. The circumference was a border of neon green with golden rays streaming off the back, similar to the crown of the Statue of Liberty. There was no noise coming from the object, completely silent. The final Lusby case occurred on August 7, 2020 and involves a humanoid encounter. The witness says that she had become very interested in spirituality, crystals, and particularly meditation. On the night of August 7, she was meditating when she suddenly woke up to discover that she was no longer in her room. As she says, I was in a room with a large window that looked out over blackness. A man with intensely peaceful and overwhelmingly calming vibrations was there. What stuck out most to me was his bright blonde hair, long but kind of spiked, and his bright blonde, almost white eyebrows. He was wearing a blue, strange material shirt. We were talking, but in our heads. And I got to ask him why they don't intervene to help us. He said they would only do so in the case of us destroying Earth or other dimensions. I felt upset. Then he played me a slideshow in my mind of all kinds of battles and plagues and wars from the beginning until now. I knew he meant that we as humans have survived so much, and we will likely survive this. I then opened my eyes, and I was in bed in a strange position. I felt like I had had no sleep, and my night routine had not been done. I can remember even more extreme details, but this sums it up. The witness does add that her animals seemed to react to all this, and she does believe that she had missing time and was possibly, quote, abducted. All right, there you go, Jeff. There you go, Old Mountain Marine and Metals. Only 3 cases in Lusby. Again, it is a very small town, but 2 involve humanoids. And that first case is like, wow, really a lot of detail to that case. And I would love to talk to that witness because it's clear that there's more details that he has not fully described in regards perhaps to his early childhood encounters and what's going on with him now regarding this apparent implant in his lung or whatever that might be. It is quite unusual, and given that I've talked to so many people who've had encounters and described similar things, I suspect it's probably related to his encounters. Of course, hard to say for sure. We don't know. But there you go. 5 locations all over the planet. And once again, still finding cases in all of them, despite some of them being very small towns. So I'm going to keep exploring our planet and seeing if my assertion is true that every town and every city on this planet has been visited, because I think it is true. If any of you out there have a location you'd like me to explore, please feel free to submit it in the comment section or via email at prestonufo@gmail.com, and I will certainly put it on my list. But please do be patient because my list is now, as I said earlier, over 1,000 locations. So amazing. It's also incredible that it's not just sightings, but we're finding landings and humanoids, missing time, onboard encounters, the whole range of encounters, and again supported by a wide variety of evidence. And again, for me, the 2 main takeaways are, 1, that UFOs are ubiquitous, that they are being seen everywhere on this planet, which goes to show that there are far more encounters than most people realize, because as any UFO researcher will tell you, only one, I'll be generous and say 1 in 20, I think it's closer to 1 in 100 people report their encounters. The point is the vast majority of people don't report their encounters. So the fact that I'm finding cases in all of these locations, well, you could probably times it by 100. So there's a lot more encounters that have never been documented and probably never will be. And I think the other main takeaway is that UFOs appear to be conducting a very carefully orchestrated and vigorous publicity campaign. In other words, disclosure. They have shown themselves to all humanity. How many cases does it take? 1 million? 10 million? 100 million? Because it's close to that. I would say at least 100 million cases have occurred. Far more than that, I'm guessing. Some studies show that about 1 in 20 people have seen a UFO, and with almost 9 billion people on this planet, well, you can do the math. It's more than a few million for sure. All right, well, that's it for now. I'm definitely going to keep doing these hometown episodes. It's absolutely a fascinating research project. I had no idea it would be so ongoing. Really, I'm kind of surprised by it. And again, these are a little bit more difficult to produce than my other YouTube episodes because so much work has to go into finding all of these sightings. And there's a few towns that I'm starting to get stumped on. I'm a little worried, but I'm going to keep looking. And if I can't find any, I will admit defeat on a couple of these locations, which are very, very small towns. I think some of you are submitting locations where you're very cleverly trying to stump me, because if there's just a few hundred people in a town, yeah, it's quite possible I won't be able to find a UFO encounter there. But I'm not giving up. All right, that's it. Until next time, you guys, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. And as I always like to say, keep searching for the truth. It's out there. Keep asking those hard questions. And most important of all, keep having fun. And I'll see you next time for a new episode of UFOs and the Paranormal. Bye for now.